Say what you want about Ubisoft, but they make some visually sumptuous and technically leading titles. Only Sony first party have more in-house technology. In 2017's gorgeous Assassin's Creed Origins, they dropped the Anvil with another. And thanks to a free patch last month, we can see how next-gen fares with it. Carmoon, that's pretty good. 5 years is a long time in games. Take 1980 to 1985, well 79 if you're being picky. We leapt from this to this. And these kind of revelatory shifts are no longer a reality, and with 2017's Origins being a clear case of if it ain't broke compared to 2020's Valhalla. However, thanks to the embedded backwards compatibility inside these new consoles, it is a chance to get in some of Valhalla's and early Odyssey boosts. Namely 60 FPS on consoles, including that little Series S. And as I covered in detail in my next gen patches videos, this is just a BC Plus patch, namely the same game code as run on the Xbox One, the Xbox One X or the PS4 Pro, with a developer update to enable it to unlock FPS to 60 and maybe change some options within the configuration file that the game ran with anyway, and therefore use a little more power of the consoles. Think of it like a launch day version of Unity code just delayed. This means all consoles run it in a GCN compatible code base and have limited access to the core updates and treats that these new consoles CPU GPU offer. This may mean not full clocks, not full cores, no access to the IO and SSD, meaning you can still play this on an external drive and gain the boosts if offers. So what are they then? Well, that really depends on your console of choice. The Series S roughly runs the Xbox One S code, the Series X runs the Xbox One X code, and the PS5 runs the PS4 Pro code. Quality is the same across the board, at least for the Series X and the PS5, very close to almost identical at this point to the high settings on PC, including tessellation, global illumination, LOD distance, shadow cascades, SSR, and that TAA, which includes a reconstruction pass and a dynamic scaling solution. All of this is all as per PC and looks absolutely identical across the board. Not going back to compare what they were on the Xbox One X and PS4 Pro, but I'm pretty sure they were close to this. The only thing I did note is the FOV is obviously further out on PC and you get that half rate cloth physics on console. That's it, everything else is a wash. The biggest difference in terms of settings on the Series S is ambient occlusion is cut back, some of the shadows are low resolution, but again it's a resolution based effect, and some of the post effects appear dynamic. The AA solution and reconstruction technique that it uses is very impressive, but it can cause some heavy ghosting and blurring on alpha transparencies. Due to the alpha to coverage technique that it uses for those, that means it ghosts a lot, and the lower the resolution the more this stands out, making the PS5 better than the Series S and the Series X slightly better than the PS5. The higher the resolution scale, the less impactful this is on those areas you see. But with a dynamic solution in place, this means in heavy combat, all of them scale down, and that means it can get worse at certain points. Here in side by side, you can see all settings are identical. Draw distance, shadow cascade, foliage. The only difference is the Series S, like I say, lower levels of ambient occlusion and some dynamic effects at certain points, and the gamma output. It's much darker on the PS5, followed by the PC, and then the Series X and Series S are the lightest of the lot. Now I've ran these at the same gamma output and on the same brightness, but I have tried to correct them in post. That and the disc version has a much darker tone mapping than the now patch version, which seems to brighten all versions up, and also it looks like they've improved the alpha effect. Certainly that mist does seem to be slightly stronger now than it was on the disc version. The other thing to talk about is the fact that reconstruction technique is very good, certainly helping the dynamic resolution scaling and hiding those dips when it does. But on PC, that dynamic solution causes one issue, and that is it turns VSync off. You can't get it to turn back on in the menu, and also the timing rate is wrong, usually a divide by issue here, so it runs at 61 FPS rather than 60 Hz. To fix this, you have to go into the driver panel and then fix VSync on within there and then leave it off in the menu. And this restores that to a correct 60 FPS target and also enforces VSync. Something I suspect the console versions also use, making a system call to align the engine sync to the API cycle timing. This is because It's got a huge amount of input lag. When I tested all the AC games, even on PS5 it's higher than Series X. And this is likely an issue that they're using on consoles to get that target 60 FPS output. So when you do this on PC, it fixes that tearing issue and it almost exactly aligns to the PS5 and Series X, meaning it now has VSync enabled but also includes dynamic scaling. But it doesn't work as well as consoles, and this is really down to the fact that I've mentioned before. So just like Far Cry 4, that HRAA solution, many techniques in game engines are not possible on PC, or at least they're cut back, as they lack the low level exposure to implement some of these or all of these solutions. And on PC, this means that it's a vendor by vendor solution. As such, the DRS on Nvidia here at least only seems to reduce by 30%, meaning we're often only down to 1800p as a low, and looking at performance, you can see it clearly needs to go lower on this particular card.
Make certain no one gets out of the house alive. Hepsiva! We're just here to talk!
So with all that explained, let's get into the numbers. So like I say, this is basically running the Xbox One S if it's the Series S version, it's running the PS4 Pro if it's the PS5, and it's running the Xbox One X if it's the Series X. This means that all the resolution limits are the same as they were there. This means that on the Series S, it's got a high of 1920 by 1080, but it's often sub that, somewhere around 1600 by 900, and can go as low as 1280 by 720. The PlayStation 5, the same as the Pro, can go as high as 2880 by 1620, which is there often, and as low as 2080 by 1170. The Series X can go as high as 3840 by 2160, and is often around 1440p, but can go as low as 2432 by 1368. This means that all of them frequently dip below those targets, but all scale more than the PC does. The example here in this cutscene is on PC, it's 1800p, on the PlayStation 5 it's 1170p, on the Series X it's 1368p, and on the Series S it's 720p. Now on console this is great, as the PS5 is pretty much a locked 60 FPS, as is Series X, only slightly worse than that, with the Series S being slightly worse over that, but not by a significant amount, and you'd never really call any of them bad. They really do hold on to that 60 FPS in my tested sections here without any major concerns, and that's not a surprise with the headroom that's left over. Taking into account my overclocked RTX 20 here, so much closer to 2070 Super, it's often lower in the 40s at the same points as it is here on the consoles, but that resolution increase is much higher, meaning a huge 77% at times higher resolution on this PC version than the highest in the same comparisons on the Series X, which itself is already higher than the PS5. And this all comes at the cost of performance, somewhere between 40 and 50% worse than it is on the consoles. So this shows how much performance is left over on the table in those consoles because of that backwards compatibility limitation, with the PS5 and Series X often outperforming this particular GPU by upwards of 30% in other tests. So here, they're both far behind this, which shows the sacrifices being made in this BC solution, and also the fact that the RTX 2070 here needs to scale much more aggressively to get closer to those levels. Running this at 1800p and allowing that 30% dynamic scaling would likely get it back to somewhere just sub 1440p and have similar levels of performance to the Series X. And that would be a target I would recommend. I do not know why the dynamic solution doesn't scale as well here as it should, but it simply doesn't. You can see in comparisons here with all the performance levels, they all perform pretty close to 60 FPS, but the PC version judges heavily in these comparison shots because it's constantly sub 60 FPS at all times. It's just too much for the GPU to run this at 4K. In the comparisons of visual settings, they're all pretty much the same aside those gamma outputs like I say, and there's a good example of here with those lower resolution targets. At times the PS5 and the Series X look very similar, and then in long distances you can see some sub-pixel elements, and certainly it's a lot softer on the PS5 and even softer on the Series S. But overall, all of them don't really stand out when you're at normal standard viewing distances. They all look pretty good. The biggest difference really is around those dithering alpha effects on hair, which are all run at lower resolutions than native buffers anyway, because that's just how alpha effects works. Generally they can be half resolution, quarter resolution, as can SSR reflections, depth of field passes. All of those things do not run at the same resolutions when I count these games as the native output buffer. That's just a standard process. And this also means, like I mentioned at the start, that just like the Xbox One S when I covered the original titles way back when, go and check the video out in the link below, that runs dynamic effects. The Series S version does exactly the same. So there's points where the depth of field is disabled because it's obviously too heavy on the impact, and therefore it turns itself off to keep performance at the target of 30. But in this case, that target has been bumped up to 60.
Surrounded by the finest soldiers.
I do not care.
You'll be killed. You need to get tougher if you want to murder that spindly shit. For sure, you'll need better armor.
I can make that myself.
Weapons are more difficult. The soldiers took everything in the village.
I will talk to the blacksmith.
Yes, Benipe can certainly make something for you. Or Senu can help you find what you need.
Senu? Senu is alive.
Look who is coming.
Senu, old girl. In fine form.
Overall, it's a great patch to the title, really improving the fluidity and those input times now that it runs at 60 FPS. And for my money, it makes these titles far more enjoyable to play and far more fun, because you now don't have that incredibly heavy lag that used to happen on all the 30 FPS titles. Like I say, it's still a heavy, slow input latency title compared to normal 60 FPS games, even third-person ones, which are usually slower than first-person ones. But like I say, the reason behind that, I suspect, is because just like on PC, they're actually using the API calls to the system OS on the consoles and not implementing their in-game engine ones, because it doesn't seem to be as effective, certainly based on what I'm seeing here on the PC solution. So overall, the best version here is the Series X for resolution and image quality. The PS5 outperforms it. None of them have any significant boosts beyond this. Loading times are pretty much the same. Again, they're slightly faster on the Series X and Series S because of that backwards compatibility implementation at the software layer. But fundamentally, expect this to be played on an external disc. Don't take up an SSD space. Get that 60 FPS enjoyment. And the PC version now does come very close to these console versions, but again, you would need to drop it lower than 4K as a target on this particular card. But you're now getting pretty much the same quality as the best on PC. The ultra settings can improve certain elements, but fundamentally this isn't a drastic shift from high to ultra high. But if you have got the power, then obviously you can bump it a little more. It certainly is quite a heavy game on CPU, memory specifically, and GPU allocation. So it's not surprising that it is quite demanding, even on something as powerful as the 2070 Super here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this fast look at this patched version of Assassin's Creed Origins. Like I say, it's still one of the better games of the recent releases of Assassin's Creed, certainly working better for me than both Valhalla and Odyssey. And I just like the whole layout and the visual aesthetic of the title. I think it works very, very well here. And again, boosting these resolutions and performance levels, it certainly is still a stunning looking title from Ubisoft. And obviously we'll be looking forward to a new Assassin's Creed title, I'm sure, very soon. But I really hope, and I keep saying this, that they try to go back to the roots of the title, more single-player story-driven, and add more budget to those areas, and not just concentrate on all this fetch quest bored out of your skull open world, when it's not a world, it's a level that's boring. But, you know, it's probably falling on deaf ears. At the end of the day, that budget on the action sequences and the story, because they are getting a bit stale and boring now. Anyway, if you like what I do here and all the technical analysis that I offer, remember you can help the channel by subscribing, by sharing. All of that is really, really important to me, and putting a comment down below, because that helps YouTube share my video and get more people watching it. You can support me on Patreon for access to exclusive content that I've got up there, and obviously early access to new content as well. And that really helps because I don't earn that much from YouTube at all. And if you do like what I do, I also do some videos over on IGN, so you can check those out as well on their performance reviews. But I'll catch you very soon on the next one.